The federal deficit's a cancer really growing on our country.
It's a problem that we need to deal with now.
The consequences will be far-reaching if this is ignored.
It is such a huge problem that if we don't get a hold of it right now, it will be devastating to our country.
We need to fix this problem before it becomes unfixable.
The American Farm Bureau Board of Directors believe that fiscal responsibility is a top priority for the American Farm Bureau. That's why the Federal Deficit Task Force Committee was put together. And we were put together to look at the deficit spending and what the consequences of deficit spending would mean to us in the future. We've heard from numerous experts from all fields of Social Security to Medicare, you name it. We've heard from those experts, and they're all concerned about the amount of spending that we're doing at a federal level, and we need to bring that spending under control.
As of the 1st of May 2009, the federal debt totaled $11,208,076,192,300.55. That's a huge number. If you just stacked up $1 bills, the pile would go from here to the moon and back to the moon again. Every one of you owes the other countries who hold our debt nearly $11,000. And in total, your share of the national debt comes to nearly $37,000. Could you write us a check today, please?
With Farm Bureau, we are small business people, and we do know what debt means. We know that a large amount of debt will destroy our business, and it's the same with our country.
If we don't do something, we're going to mortgage our country to foreign governments. We're going to mortgage our future in a way that is going to really weaken our country. And I think most Americans want to keep our country strong, and we want to have the ability to be a positive force both for our citizens and for the world. And we won't be able to do that unless we can attack the deficit.
If we continue to ignore this problem, we as a nation will become a second-rate nation because we have become so dependent upon our foreign neighbors for their finances, and we can no longer continue to operate like that.
I think back on what happened at the fall of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union fell apart because they could no longer afford to keep up their way of life. And people don't think that that could happen in America, but it could. We could lose the ability to spend money on anything other than the cost of our national debt.
If the deficit continues and we get to the point where we can only pay our interest, what happens if we have a security problem? What happens if we have another attack? Where do we get that money to defend ourselves and build our security?
Since the beginning of the year, we have seen some major changes in our nation's economic picture, and certainly in the overall deficit situation. When the board developed the original idea for the task force, the deficit for 2009 was expected to come in at $213 billion. Today, the projected deficit for 2010 is $1.4 trillion with a T, nearly 7 times our expectations less than a year ago. The explosion in government spending and the deficit is not expected to last long. Once the economy begins to recover, the deficit should fall, but will still be north of $500 billion. A short-term boost in spending was necessary. Our economy and our financial systems were in need of some major cash infusion. Could the stimulus package have been put together differently? Of course, but some action was certainly necessary.
There are times for deficit, but also at that same time we've got to be looking in the future to plan how we're going to get through that deficit and how we're going to get back to a balanced budget.
We must admit the real problem lies with us. Our political leadership over much of the last 30+ years has effectively told us what we wanted to hear, that we can pretty much have anything that we want, and we really don't have to worry about how we pay for it.
It's going to take change. People are going to have to get used to the idea that we may have to make sacrifices.
If you think it's tough now, what will it be for your kids? It may be an unsurmountable task at that point. Today we can make a change that may be tough to do, but it's not impossible. And if it gets completely out of control and goes further and further, it could be a task that we can't get over and can't get around.
Our federal debt is just a collection of all the annual deficits we've run since the beginning of the country. Sure, there have been some years when we've paid down our national debt, But there have been a lot more years, especially lately, where we have spent much more than we have taken in. You can summarize the federal budget pretty succinctly using one hand. We spend as a federal government just about all we take in on 5 things: national defense, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the federal debt. The problem is, unless there are changes, their projected spending path will consume our entire revenue budget. This will leave no money for any of the other parts of government, like bridges, or schools, the FBI, or even farm programs. So something has to give. Interest on the debt is non-negotiable. The government has to pay it, unless we're ready for other nations to call in our debt, and we're not. The task force considers national defense to be off the table. It's just too important to face cuts.
Social Security has become so important to our society. For a lot of folks, it's the only retirement they have.
For Social Security, there's some really concrete things that we can do to fix it. They are tough decisions to make, though. It's either increasing taxes or reducing benefits out in the future.
The number one issue that we found out is that you simply cannot balance the budget. You cannot reduce the deficit to balance the budget unless you get your arms around Medicare and Medicaid. It's just it is the 800-pound gorilla in the budget deficit.